My name is Caroline Hodgson and I'm the current president of the Bradford Textile Society. We have a monthly programme of online lectures focused around design, innovation and sustainability this year. Details can be found on our website. I'm delighted to host the annual PP Townend Memorial Lecture in conjunction with the Textile Institute. The Textile Institute promotes professionalism in textiles and its related industries globally. At the Bradford Textile Society, we have members who were students of PP Townend, and they tell me that he was a star in a remarkable galaxy of illustrious professors at the University of Leeds textile department in the 1950s. He was known for his profound knowledge of the worsted and woolen systems, publishing a large library of research, much of which is still relevant today. But he was also a remarkable personality, and who the Textile Institute and the Bradford Textile Society are proud to remember. The Bradford Textile Society was established in 1893 and is believed to be the UK's, if not the world's, oldest textile society. It has been running its prestigious design competition for the past 90 years. We would like to thank John Smedley for their generous sponsorship of the knit section again this year. Sue Geldard, our Society Secretary, and Jill Craven have been instrumental in moving the design competition online for this year. The deadline has now been moved to Friday, the 21st of May, following consultation with tutors due to the current restrictions. Details of the competition can be found on the front page of our website. I'd now like to introduce this evening's guest speaker, Ian Maclean MBE, Managing Director of John Smedley Ltd. Ian has grown up with the business as an 8th generation family member. Through his roles as Vice Chairman for UKFT and Trustee and Honourable Treasurer of the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, he works to ensure the longevity of the time-honoured craft of manufacturing knitwear in the UK. John Smedley is renowned worldwide as a leader of production of fine-gauge knitwear products. It was founded in 1784 at Lee Mills, Matlock, Derbyshire. John Smedley is the world's oldest manufacturing factory in continuous operation. Ian will speak for around 40 minutes and then respond to questions. Please post the questions in the Q&A section. We're aiming for a 7:30 p.m. finish. Vivian is in the background to answer any pressing questions, any technical issues you may have in the chat. And also we'll post relevant links, links to the website, etc. there. So questions to Ian in the Q&A, please, and any sort of urgent issues in the chat to help us answer most effectively. So I'll hand you over to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. What I'll do now is just share my screen, if that works for everybody. Go to screen share. Okay, I hope everybody can see my slideshow all right there. That's the first slide. Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline, for your introduction, and thank you very much for everybody for joining us this evening. I do recognise that it is a time of unrelenting bad news in terms of health and business, and I hope this evening I can give you a little bit of light relief and tell you some anecdotes and stories about John Smedley, my family business. As Caroline said, I'm a member of the family that owns John Smedley. It's still a family business as it was when it started over 235 years ago, although it turned itself into a limited company in the 1890s, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. We're very proud to be a family business. It does give us a very sort of unique perspective on business and on the ability to employ other families, of course, generations of families who've worked for John Smedley, that make up all these wonderful stories that we've got. And you see my first slide here, it's called A History of John Smedley. It used to be actually called The History of John Smedley, but I changed it a few days ago because I thought, well, firstly, it's a little bit eccentric in that it's not a purely sort of in date order, shall we say. It's really a collection of individual stories, and those stories are evolving and new stories are appearing all the time. And that's mainly because about 7 or 8 years ago, we employed an archivist for the first time to both look into the historic garments that we've kept going back in history, and the documents and the artifacts, and to start to research those things and to start to tell the story or stories of the company, of the family, of the families that worked in the business, and to bring those out one by one over time. So as I say, it's kind of an evolving picture. And what I have here today is just really an eclectic mix of some of those stories that I've heard and know about and know a little bit about, and I can pass on some of that to you. So that's my first slide. I'll go on to the next one. Hopefully this will work. So the first slide here, I've put this picture up because this shows you roughly what was going on before factories were built. So hosiery was knit on these hand frame knitting machines in people's homes by individuals, manipulating the machinery both with their feet and legs and their arms, and they were making hosiery in their homes. And that was how the industry was constructed for a very, very, very long time. And then and many of these homes, of course, are dotted all around the Midlands, and you will probably have seen them, and we've got many of them around our factory near Lee Mills in Derbyshire. And then in 1771, you have Richard Arkwright's first cotton spinning mill at Cromford, which is only about 2 miles away from where we're based. And the hint of what's gone on here is in the picture. So it's all about the energy use and the energy source. And what Arkwright has done is he's moved the motive power of the machine from the individual to water power, diverting water, in his case, from the River Derwent, and also from sows or underground water sources that come out of the Peak District. And he was diverting all of these water sources into one area where he could then power his factory through a water wheel to power the machinery to spin cotton. And his great invention, the cotton spinning jenny. And Arkwright was a typical entrepreneur. He had the idea, he eventually had the patent, and of course he had the machinery that he wanted to manipulate, but he didn't have the capital to build his first factory. And this is where the link between Arkwright's factory and our factory appears. Because Arkwright went to a local wealthy individual called Peter Nightingale, who owned a lot of land in the area, and he'd made his money through, one of the ways he'd done it was through lead mining and making bullets for the army. And Arkwright borrowed money from Nightingale to set up his first factory. And I suppose quite quickly, Nightingale must have seen how effectively his capital was being deployed in this new venture, and thought, well, he'd quite like a factory of his own. So he came 2 miles round the valley, a little bit away from the Derwent, and up a smaller valley called where the Lee Brook flows. And he had a piece of land. In fact, I imagine that the Nightingales owned most of the land that you can see in this valley where Lee Mills is based. And he built his factory, which is kind of hidden in the middle of this picture. So I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen there, but I'm just highlighting the original mill building, which is right in the middle of the Lee Mills site where the cursor is there. Next to it, of course, you see what would be the boiler house and the chimney for the coal smoke to go up to run the boilers. And that was kind of the second form of motive power. The first one being the water wheel, which was also at the end of this end of the factory here being powered by water, which was diverted from the Lee Brook. And Nightingale built his factory here in 1784, so only 13 years after Arkwright's first factory. And of course, he didn't know anything about how to run a cotton spinning business or cotton spinning factory or the machinery or anything. And he needed somebody who knew how to do that. So he hired a man called John Smedley, who was a framework knitter based in Wirksworth. And John Smedley ran the factory as his tenant, as Nightingale's tenant. And the Smedley family remained tenants on this land, which was owned by the Nightingales, for 100 or nearly 110 years or thereabouts before they purchased the whole site freehold. And I'll come to that more towards the end of the talk. But the important thing to know is that the Nightingale family links the Arkwright mills to this mill here and our family's mill. And the Nightingale family lived just on top of the hill nearby. They had a home which they occupied during the summertime, and then in the wintertime they lived down in near Sevenoaks in Kent. What you can see here in this picture, of course, is there are many other buildings built around the original mill building. Sort of, I think every generation or every decade you'd find new buildings being built as the factory expanded. This picture here shows again, the original stone mill building hiding in amongst much later brick-built buildings. We believe that the greatest number of people that worked on the site at Lee Mills was probably in the 1930s and was probably about 1,300 people, my archivist has found out. Today, we occupy the same site with only about 250 people. So we are rattling around in a huge space with many empty buildings. And it's one of my challenges as a shareholder and the manager of the business to work out how to reduce our costs of occupancy of this site, because it's a very difficult thing to pay for if you're also trying to run a business at the same time. We have in our archive series of photographs from a number of different eras of the business. And I put this one up because it shows raw cotton in bales form coming into the buildings, having been transported from somewhere else, I imagine either the Caribbean or the US. And this photograph taken about the 1930s. I put it up because if I go back to the original John Smedley, the founder of the business, he didn't make a big success of the business. In fact, from what we know, which is not a lot, the business almost failed on a couple of occasions, and it did a lot of damage to John Smedley's health. And he brought in his son, his younger son, who was also called John Smedley, or John Smedley II, to work in the business and to be an apprentice and to train. And in fact, we have the apprenticeship document with both signatures of the father and the son on it in our boardroom. And when eventually the son took over from his father, he brought a number of innovations to the business, which still remarkably inform, I suppose, the brand and also the kind of culture of our business today. And one of those ideas was that in order to distinguish his product in the marketplace from a lot of other manufacturers of underwear, eventually when they got knitting, the cotton, was to aim not at the bottom of the market and make the cheapest product, or the middle of the market where you might find the biggest volume, but John Smedley decided to aim at the very top of the market and go for the very best quality, and also to make sure that wherever his product was distributed, it had the name John Smedley clearly inside the garment. So customers who purchased this high quality, high price product began to associate quality with the name John Smedley. And quality, as we know, many of us who work in this industry, fundamentally comes from the quality of the raw materials. So what you see here is the highest quality cotton in the marketplace that you could buy, and we've always bought the highest quality. It became known as Sea Island cotton. And again, some of you will know that terminology as well. So Sea Island cotton is pitched at the top of the market. It's the highest and finest and longest staple cotton, the most bright white cotton that you can buy to make wonderful high quality garments. And interestingly, our name has become associated with Sian and cotton. And I was just looking on my bookshelf behind me a few minutes before we started, and remembered that many of the James Bond books, and I've got like the first 6 of them here, Ian Fleming, he didn't mention John Smedley specifically in the books, but he does mention Sian and cotton many times, and James Bond wearing Sian and cotton when he's abroad in some hot country is mentioned multiple times in these first series of the books. So I like to think we're in a way linked to that aspect of the business. So here we have John Smedley II building up a business based on high quality. And the other thing that he did, his other innovation, was to convert originally cotton spinning and cotton knitting, particularly cotton knitting machines, to knit both cotton and wool. And what this gave him was a 2-season business. So anybody who knows anything about the textile industry will know that if you are a Scottish cashmere business, for example, you have the difficulty of really running a business that only makes money in one season and loses money in the other season. Whereas John Smedley built a business where he can sell cotton in the summer season and wool in the winter season. So he had a 2-season business, and ultimately a very profitable business that was very successful. And in the middle of the Victorian era, when he built it up, he made a great job of it. And this last picture I've got from a similar time period shows, I suppose, what is almost an advert for quality, where the long johns there that we're making are being tested to destruction by a couple of our former colleagues. So who is this guy, John Smedley II? Let's talk a little bit more about him. You can see his dates there, 1803 to 1874. And we've got 2 portraits, one of John and one of his wife, Caroline. And you can see by the clothing they're wearing that at this stage in their life, they've made the business a big success and they're very wealthy. And really, John Smedley II's career running the business himself was 25 years, up to about 1847 or 1848, when he married Caroline. And when they got married, they went on a tour of Europe and visited a number of spa locations. And John Smedley's health wasn't that good. And I think he found that these spas in various parts of Switzerland and France, perhaps, were good for his health. And when he came back to Matlock, eventually, he decided that he was going to start a second business. And he therefore had an entirely separate career for the next 25 years. He had managers running John Smedley Knitwear, but he built up himself this new idea of a spa, a water treatment, very much a medical operation to a degree to help people with their health in Matlock Town. And I've got a picture here of the second business that he built up. And I don't know if you can see across the middle of the building here, just very faintly, it says Smedley's Hydro. You can just about see that. And he, again, had 25 years building this up. I think the first building he built was on the far end. And then as the business was successful, he gradually added buildings and buildings and buildings. So it's absolutely huge. And in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this institution was able to look after 2,000 people at a time, taking the waters and having, warm water baths and treatments and things like that. Incredibly successful business. So John Smedley was, one of those true, amazing sort of Victorian entrepreneurs. Eventually, the Hydro failed as a business, I believe, in the 1920s or 1930s, and was eventually taken over by the local government authority. And today it houses the local political government offices in the centre of Matlock Town. But really putting Matlock on the map in terms of this location. Towards the end of his life, John Smedley built himself a very large house, very much a castle on the top of the hill Ryber Castle overlooking Matlock. It has a very dominant position right on top of the hill, and you can see it from miles and miles around. He was a very autocratic person and decided that, you know, no architect was good enough to design the thing that he wanted. So he designed it himself, which meant it had all kinds of technical faults. But anyway, he got on and built it because it was his and he could do what he liked. And today, it eventually fell in disrepair a long time afterwards and was taken over by a local man who has started to renovate it. And in our archive, again, we have only one photograph of the interior of Ryber Castle. And here it is. It's the main central hall, which is really very tall. I think it's 3 or 4 stories tall. And in the middle of the picture, here is John Smedley II himself. This picture taken in, I think, 1874. So very much in the very last year of his life. And he's surrounded by members of his family with amazing sort of Gothic Victorian architecture. And I just wanted to point out to you this kind of rose in the roof, in the very ceiling of the building, in this very tall hall. And what happened was when the building fell into great disrepair, bits of the ceiling fell off and fell down to the ground. And the man who took over the building and started to renovate it found pieces of these roses on the floor. And from them, he started to renovate the building in the same way it was back in the 1870s. And I've had the privilege of going there and seeing the building on the inside. And this is what it looks like today. So what you see here is scaffolding where we've climbed up nearly to the roof of that very tall central hall. And these roses in the top are almost direct replicas of what was there in 1874. So that's really amazing. It's wonderful to see this incredible building being given a second life by someone local who's known it all his life and has spent a lot of money on putting it back to the way it was, which is amazing. So eventually, John Smedley and Caroline died and passed the business on. They didn't have any children of their own, so they passed it on to a distant cousin who I believe had to return from a trip to Australia to sort of take over his inheritance. And he was called John Marsden. Anyway, he died when he was in his 40s in a riding accident in London. And the business automatically then passed to his 9-year-old son, who is this gentleman here, John B. Marsden Smedley, who is also my great-grandfather. I never knew him. He died before I was born. But he inherited the business when he was 9. But of course, he couldn't legally take over the running of it until he was 21. But when he was 21, he did take over the business. And he must have set, I think, some kind of record for being the chairman and running a business in Britain, because he lived to the age of 92. So he ran it as chairman, as an autocrat in his own way for 70 years. Now, just to put this in perspective, we're talking about the end of the Victorian era, the Boer War, the Edwardian era, the First World War, the interwar period, the Great Depression, think about that, the Second World War, and the 1950s, all the way through to his death in 1959. I mean, it's absolutely incredible to think how he brought the business through all of those extraordinary events. And his portrait hangs in the boardroom where we have board meetings each month. And whenever I think I have a particular problem in the business, I look at his portrait and think, well, you know, it's really not that bad compared to what he took the business through. So an absolutely amazing man. And of course, his very long lifespan, he had 6 children, and my grandmother was the very youngest one of those children. She eventually married a Mr. Mclean. That's why my name is not Smedley. But the eldest son, so John's eldest son, who would have been my great uncle, who is called George Marsden Smedley. And this is where we kind of enter another big group of stories coming out here through our archivist and our archive research, the 2 world wars. So here we are at World War I, and George Marsden Smedley has been to Harrow School. He's got a place to go to Cambridge. He has been the captain of the football team, the captain of the cricket team. You know, he's pretty much an all-round star, as so many of those, you know, young men were in that era. And he would have been the natural successor of the business from his father. But as soon as he came of age, he joined up and went to the front and was trained in the UK, and then went over to France to fight. And very sadly, you know, the research that we've done about his short life, and we have many letters back and forth between himself and his parents. We have all of the kind of regimental details of where he went and when. And many stories, of course, from relatives. I knew my grandmother, who of course was his youngest sister. I never had the chance to talk to her about it, but other members of the family did. So we know quite a lot about George's short life. And very sadly, you know, he arrived on the front in August 1916 on the Somme at the worst possible geographical location on the Somme at the worst possible time he could have been there. So it's probably a miracle that he survived 6 weeks, but he died 6 weeks after he arrived on the Somme in 1916, which is very, very sad and was an absolute tragedy for the family. Particularly because his body was never found. And after the war, his father made great efforts to try and find where George had either been buried or where his body might be, but he never found it. And he went on to purchase a very small plot of land, only about 10 yards by 10 yards, at the place where his best guess of where George might have fallen, and he built a monument to George in France. And we own this plot of land, and the monument is there, has been there ever since. And it's one of very small number, quite rare monuments to individual soldiers on the battlefield of the World War I. But of course, George wasn't the only one. More than 100 men went from the factories to serve in the various forces in the First World War. And again, you know, similar numbers in the Second World War. And of course, we have descendants of those gentlemen in the villages around us who also work for our business. So here you come into the theme of, you know, families being one big family in the business, all sharing these same sorts of stories. And of course, we remember these men every year on Remembrance Day. Normally, we take the whole factory staff out onto the road where the war memorials are, and we have the 2-minute silence and the reveille and the last post and all of that. But this year, these two pictures you see here were taken this year in the middle of the pandemic, and we couldn't have a big group of people all together. So we innovated a little bit, and we set up a camera, and we did the 2-minute silence into the camera, and the camera broadcast the remembrance around onto TVs throughout the factory, so all the staff where they were working could see what was going on. But there you go, bringing the story of today right up to date with that historic process of Remembrance Day each year. If we move on from those stories to talk a little bit about the products, about the garments, our archive work tells us, after several years of accessioning thousands of garments into our archive, that we have, I think, over 10,000 garments in total. And the oldest garment in our archive is a pair of long johns. In fact, it's this picture you see here of a pair of gentlemen's long johns, which date from somewhere around 1847 to 1852. And that's the oldest garment. And 10,000 garments in addition to that, all of which are now well taken care of by our archive team. Of course, for an incredibly long time in the company's history, the product that we made was long johns, either bottoms or tops or ladies combinations, and also products for children as well, fundamentally because that was what the market for knitwear was. It was underwear, to keep you warm in the winter time because nobody had central heating. And we'll come to this part of the story where we have to evolve the business rapidly away from that. But for a very long part of the history, underwear was what we made. And as I said before, we aimed at the top of the market, the highest possible quality. We innovated sometimes in materials. So you've got cotton, you've got wool, and you've got a blend of cotton and wool, sometimes silk as well, but always the same, in a sense, ecru color, colorless undergarment product in various formed the basis of our business for a very, very long time. As time passes, products start to change, and we've discovered quite a big transformation in our business in about the 1930s, where people start to have more leisure time in the UK, and they start to take up sort of outdoor sports more. And I think Fred Perry's victory in the Wimbledon Championship in, I think, about 1932, 1934, something like that, was quite a big spur towards these kind of more sporty looking out. And what we're looking at here, of course, is outerwear. So it's not the underwear anymore. We're starting to make outerwear garments. And this tennis shirt, which then went on to evolve to become a polo shirt, was it looks like a big selling product in the 1930s. Funny little side story to this is that this picture that you see here comes from a 1936 wholesale selling catalogue that we have in our archive. It's a small book with all the products in it listed. And at the front of the book, it lists out all of the names of all of the sales agents that we have in different markets around the world, because we are exporting to lots of different countries these products. And funnily enough, if you look at Belgium, what you discover is a certain René Lacoste is our sales agent in Belgium. Now you'll recognize his name because not only did he play tennis, he went on to create his own brand of shirts, and Lacoste shirts are still famous today. But I wonder where he got the idea from. You never know. Anyway, we move on from the 1930s to the big transformation in the business, which happened in the 1950s or thereabouts. Now, this is coming to the end of my great-grandfather's period of running the business, and I guess since he'd only ever known throughout his life making underwear, he didn't really grasp onto the idea of that underwear was a product that was going to disappear from people's wardrobes as central heating was put into people's homes. And it wasn't until my grandfather, Ian Mclean, took over from John Marsden Smedley in about 1960, that the company underwent a great transformation away from the declining market of underwear towards outerwear. And you also see there at the same time dyeing and color coming into the business. Of course, the black garment that you see here, which we understand Marilyn Monroe bought from a retailer called Burke in the Burlington Arcade in 1954, when she was in London making a movie with Laurence Olivier called The Prince and the Showgirl. Burke always attributed this garment to us, and we were suppliers of Burke for decades and decades. So we'd like to think that this garment was one of ours, but one of the all-time iconic pictures. I can't claim that this one is also ours because I've got no evidence at all, but it's a nice thought that all these likely lads are wearing black roll neck John Smedleys for the cover of their first album. Ah yes, James Bond again. So I've already mentioned that James Bond is written up in Ian Fleming's novels as wearing sea island cotton shirts and shorts when he's abroad. This particular photograph is taken. He was sponsored for this movie by Dunhill, I believe. So all the clothing, the big sponsorship deal was with Dunhill. But Daniel Craig has always preferred our jumpers, so he put in a special request for this black style called Bobby to wear in the movie. So we quietly supplied him with the jumper that he wanted, although Dunhill pretty much got most of the credit. And you start to see throughout this long period that John Smedley Knitwear gains a name amongst film stars, music, and sports people as well. And sports people are particularly interesting in this regard. And I've put this picture in here because of that. So we know that Roger Federer, great tennis player, is sponsored on the field of play, should we say, by any number of different companies. In this particular instance, this photograph comes from an advertisement for Rolex watches. And I think he's been sponsored by Rolex for maybe a couple of decades. And however, out off the field, off the pitch, as it were, these sportsmen and women don't want to be defined by the kind of logos that they have to wear when they're doing their work, shall we say, and they want to be themselves. And what's interesting about John Smedley, I've had many debates with many people about why doesn't John Smedley have a logo that defines it in any photograph? You know, you can see the logo and therefore you know it's John Smedley. Well, you know, customers like Roger don't want that. They want a garment where, you know, the image is them and not, you know, Ralph Lauren's polo pony on his shirt. So when I spotted this advert for Rolex watches, for which, you know, Roger's paid many millions of pounds, I kind of noticed that the button had 4 holes to it, and the particular curve on the edge of the collar was interesting, and also the way these fashionings work on the shoulder, that this was quite probably one of our shirts. So we got in contact with his agent, and she said that, yes, he'd gone into a shop in Zurich near where he lives and bought this John Smedley shirt with his own money, which was marvelous. Even though I didn't get any promotion from it, it was really nice to see that he was wearing it. And of course, if you make a great product of great quality, you always have the chance of attracting a very high quality customer. And, you know, we would say that there's probably nobody of a magnitude greater than Her Majesty the Queen. And we were very, very privileged to have had a relationship with the royal household for a number of years before receiving our royal warrant in 2013. And then in 2014, both the Queen and Prince Philip made a joint visit to our factory in the summer of 2014, and I was incredibly privileged to be able to show them around. Just a little side anecdote there about James Bond again. Of course, we had everybody and his brother come to check the factory out, of the bomb squad and the local police and everybody, including James Bond himself. And it's nice to know that James Bond does drive a blacked out Range Rover, and he does wear a Barber jacket. So just to put that one to rest, in real life, he really thinks he is James Bond. We're very pleased to show the Queen around our factory in 2014. And that brings me on to sort of selling, or other aspects of selling garments in the marketplace. In a sense, some things have changed and some things haven't changed. This goes back to my great-grandfather's era, the 1930s, and a big transformation in the UK marketplace, where the quality of roads was getting better, cars were beginning to be mass sort of built, and the price of cars was coming down. So John Marsden Smedley took the initiative and decided to put his own salesman on the road. He was going to bypass the wholesalers. So traditionally he'd sold his garments to wholesalers, and the wholesalers had sold them on to retailers. But he decided that he was going to go direct to the retailers, and he hired his own sales force. Here they are in their bowler hats with their company cars, going on the road with John Smedley across the UK. And I have to say that some things don't change that quickly, because we still do exactly the same thing today. So some aspects of the business remain similar. However, some things have changed quite a lot. Again, going back to our archive and our archive research, we believe that our first encounter with the market in Japan was probably in about 1914, when department stores like Mitsukoshi and others, who date from that era, wrote to us and requested that, you know, could they stock our famous John Smedley underwear in their shops in Tokyo. And we did that for a long time, but then we started to build partnerships in the Japanese market. And we were very, very lucky in that our business partners really invested in our brand. And here is an iconic shop of ours in the Ginza in the center of Tokyo, where we've been represented for over 25 years now. And our business partners haven't stopped there. You know, they're still growing the business, and they've opened up a new shop in 2020 in Kyoto. And so now we have 7 John Smedley shops across Japan selling our garments through our business partners in Japan. And last year, in 2019, gosh, it was over a year ago now. Princess Anne was in Tokyo for the Rugby World Cup. She's the president of Scottish Rugby, and she requested while she was there to meet some British businesses that had assets in Tokyo. And I was very lucky to be able to show her around our Ginza store shop, which our business partners in Japan, you know, there's nothing like a royal warrant and the ability to show that your brand is respected in the UK, and our Japanese partners really, really respect that of us as well. It's fantastic. And at the same time, also Prince Charles happened to be in Tokyo for another project, so our business partners got to meet him as well. Now, some things haven't changed, but some things have changed a lot. And of course, I've been associated as a director of John Smedley since 2000. So I joined the company as a non-executive director representing the family at just the same point that our IT director at the time, the very lovely John Irving, started a website, a transactional website, which was quite early on in terms of web selling. And it took a long time to build up, and there were a lot of experiments and but being quite early in that process gave us somewhat of an advantage. And our website sales have grown ever since. And it's definitely one of the decisions that we've taken in the last 20 years that's helped our business to survive, because the margins we can make out of web selling, shipping products out of Lee Mills are substantial, and they pay for a lot of the investments that we've made in machinery and people. Of course, what comes with web selling is a whole new world of marketing through social media, and you get to see and interact with consumers in a totally different way, and VIP customers and celebrities also can be seen wearing our garments in an entirely different way from those adverts that I showed you earlier with Roger Federer in them. It's just a whole new world of marketing and advertising that we are still getting to grips with, and evolves very rapidly over time, and you have to keep up with it in order to make the most of it, especially when you're a small company and don't have much money to take advantage of it. Now I'll give you a little bit about the archive just for a second. For over 230 years, the only legal entity on the Lee Mills site was the John Smedley Company, the limited company. And 3 years ago, we decided to start up a new entity, which would sit alongside us, and it would be the John Smedley Archive Charitable Trust. So we started a charity, and the intention of the charity is really mainly 2 things. One is to look after the historic assets of the company. So we have gifted all of those assets, like the garments, the documents, the historic artifacts, over to the archive to look after in perpetuity, and we funded the archive to do that. But what they get to then do, of course, is to turn those assets into stories, and the stories kind of flow back towards the company to build up the mythology and the mystique and the brand of the company, and help us to sell these jumpers. So it's kind of a 2-way flow of information, but with the Archive Charitable Trust really building on the stories based upon the assets that they've got. And we're only very small, of course, because we've just started. We've got six trustees, but we do have a long-term vision. And what we'd like to be able to do is to bring all these wonderful historical assets that we've got and make them more available to the public and to academics and researchers to see and to learn from. And the way to do that is through aiming for a museum. So ultimately, we would like to work our way slowly but deliberately towards a museum, which would be absolutely amazing. And of course, here are some of the examples of the story. So on the left-hand side, one of the outputs of the archive team at the moment are books that they've researched and published. And on our site, those historic buildings, we do have a small area near the bottom end of the site, or the south end of the site, where we'd like to see that some old cottages that we've renovated, alongside possibly some new buildings and some conversion of other buildings, will form the basis for this museum ultimately, when we can afford to get it made. Of course, coming back to the company, there are a number of things that we need to continue to invest in to keep ourselves going. And now I'm thinking a little bit more about the future here. We have a skill base of incredibly loyal and long-serving staff who know how to make our high-quality jumpers. And in order to keep the business going, we have to rely almost really on ourselves to keep investing in bringing new people into the business and training them up and giving them a career in knitwear and in John Smedley. On the right-hand side, I've got Rachel here, who's our HR director, and she's been involved with drawing up, alongside UKFT, a knitting apprenticeship for our industry. And on the left, I've got Georgia here, who is our knitting apprentice and programming apprentice. And that's just a great thing to see, that we can be involved in the industry, working with UKFT and government to develop training, to bring new people into our industry and give them a fantastic career. In addition to people, of course, we have to invest heavily in the infrastructure of the factory, not just the buildings that I've showed you some pictures of, but also all of the machinery in the factory too. And this energy use here of oil-fired boilers, these boilers, I think originally they're almost as old as me, possibly more than 50 years old. And they were fired on heavy fuel oil for many, many, many years, producing steam that we use throughout the factory in many manufacturing processes and in production. And we renewed those a couple of years ago now to be much more efficient and powered by natural gas. Of course, one of the aspects of that is our CO2 emissions halved and our SO2 emissions went to zero. So we are on a path towards greater sustainability, but it'll take a lot more to get us to where we really need to be. So I'm coming towards the end of my talk here, but I just wanted to introduce or bring us back to this, the Nightingales, and sort of coming full circle to a degree. Back in May of last year, it would have been Florence Nightingale's 200th birthday. And I know, because I was involved in some of the planning, that there were big plans for celebrations in Derby Cathedral at that time, all of which had to be cancelled because of COVID. But we have researched our links with the Nightingale family, and we have direct links with Florence herself. And I can show you, I hope you can see this. You won't see much of the detail, but this amazing historic document is the deed of sale between the Nightingale family and the John Smedley Company, dated 1894, when the John Smedley Company purchased the freehold of its factory site from the Nightingale family. And the story is that I didn't know this document existed until a couple of years ago. I was searching through our archive of contracts, looking for a particular contract, and I couldn't find it. So I asked our solicitor to empty his safe and bring in all the documents that he had, and he brought this one in. And at the back of it, it is signed by my great-grandfather, John Marsden Smedley, and Florence Nightingale. You probably can't see it there, but I have Florence Nightingale's signature on this contract, which is absolutely astonishing. And probably the biggest story I'll ever get out of John Smedley. And they lived, of course, at Lea Hurst, very close to our factory. And we celebrated as best we could her life. But of course, along came COVID-19 in the last year, and has caused us tremendous problems, as it will have done to you, all of you here tonight, whether in your businesses or in your personal lives. I'm absolutely certain about that. But it was a huge shock to us. We had to rearrange the factory so that everybody could work safely. We had to introduce all kinds of new procedures and processes, but we got through that. We take everybody's temperature today. We make sure everybody's sitting well apart, and very few people in the offices, or no people in the offices if they can work from home. and lots of cleaning processes and all the rest of it. And we have managed to keep going, but it has not been easy at all. And our shops have been closed for quite a lot of the time too. So our sales have taken a dive, and that's been very, very difficult. We are sincerely hoping that this situation won't go on for much longer and our shops will be able to open again in London. But all the staff have been absolutely magnificent. Fantastic working with them. They've kept as positive as they can be through these great difficulties. And back in May and June of last year, we did close the factory for a short while, but when we opened up again, we decided, because in the news, the story was that the NHS and people working in care homes and doctors didn't have enough PPE, that we would make scrubs and give them away, partly because the government had absolutely no process at all to deal with the UK sourcing of scrubs and PPE. We just couldn't even talk to the government. They didn't know how to talk to us. So we ended up just making them and giving them away. So we've made many, many new friends and fans amongst over 25 doctors' practices and care homes and hospitals in the Derby greater region. And they're all wearing the world's finest scrubs made by John Smedley, for sure. I want to end with my last slide here before I take questions. I'm sorry I've gone on for quite a long time, but as you can see, there's a fair few things to say. Really trying to be positive and look to the future. Anybody who works in the fashion industry knows that we're always developing products for future seasons. So we are developing autumn winter 21. We're looking at colors for spring 22. And you've got to remain positive and hope that all of this bad stuff that we're in now comes to an end as quickly as possible. And I just put these two pretty pictures up here to show you that we are working on the future. We are thinking to the future. We're thinking positively, and we can't wait for COVID-19 to be history. And with that, I will call it an end and ask for Caroline to come back, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for a really captivating talk, Ian. There's just so many fascinating stories. Can't wait for the museum to open and to be able to visit it and delve deeper. And such a coincidence and so timely hearing about your discovery of Florence Nightingale. And I know it was sort of during the time that you were creating PPE equipment last year. So very timely indeed. We've got a number of questions which we will endeavour to cover. I'm conscious of the time. We may run over a little, but understand if people will have to leave us sharp at 7:30, and it may be that Ian has kindly agreed to answer some by email if necessary. But I'll go to Haldy from British Wool. Haldy has a question for you, which I'll put you on live, Haldy, if you can hear us. Haldy, is your microphone working? Maybe not. I'll ask. Haldy has typed a question here, so I will ask on behalf of her. How do you think the UK textile manufacturing will change post-pandemic? Are you seeing any changes to the future trends already?
So I think, I don't think it'll be related specifically to the pandemic, but from what I can see through my role at John Smedley, through my role at UKFT and QEST, and just generally looking out in the industry and across the landscape, it's amazing how many people want to make stuff. I know there is a part of the academic industry that or academic community that puts out a lot of designers, but equally there are an awful lot of people who want to make things, and that's very, very encouraging. And I think that while our industry today it's seen a little bit of growth in the last few years, not a lot, but if you think that in 1980 there were about 1 million people working in the textile industry in the UK. And today there's about 150,000. You know, we've lost about 90% of what we had 40 or 50 years ago, that we're starting from a really low base. But for sure, those people who come up with innovative business models, that they think about their consumers and go for the sustainability aspect, because that's the growing part of any industry. Those two things combined will see businesses grow in the future. And I have every confidence that we also have structures through UKFT, the government, and through grant givers like QEST to help those sort of micro businesses starting off to grow and become bigger businesses ultimately.
Yes, absolutely. I have a question here from Dana. Do you use whole garment knitting technology?
That's a very, very good question. We've worked with Shima Seiki of Japan for, I think the very first Shima machines we bought were in 1992, would you believe? So a very long time ago. And we've always worked with them sort of as a development partner. So any new technology that they brought out, like Apex 3, Apex 4, whole garment technology, they always developed the finest gauge of that with us. So we do have some quite old whole garment machines, not very many of them, and they do form a small part of our fashion collection. But we find that the traditional machines, and of course we still have fully fashioned machines that were British made from 30 or 40 years ago, do serve our purposes quite well. And so it's kind of a balance, really. A little bit of whole garment, but quite a lot of traditional knitting machines.
And from Jane, good evening. As a current textile student, do you have any advice for the next step post-pandemic and post-Brexit?
Wow, that's a challenging question.
Does this go back to your answer on the making and
I think
and the knowledge on how things are made? And
I think traditionally that I think the students that we see coming to us are a mixture of, we have of course the design element, but also the makers, and apprenticeships are an important element of that. On the design side, we tend to see students who've graduated or even gone on to do an MA through that kind of education route. And the retailers will be having difficulties as we come out of COVID. And I don't know what sort of the employment prospects will be like with them, but I think, if it's your ambition and the thing you want to do in life, you've just got to keep going at it and see where it takes you.
And following on with education, but moving to sort of the younger years, a question from Malcolm Campbell, aka Malcolm the Weaver. How do you maintain the interest and appreciation of knitwear in natural fibres, be it merino, wool, cashmere, cotton or silk, to younger generations and new customers? And do John Smedley work with education to promote your brand and explain the value and benefits of natural fibres?
Yes, we do, in a small way. Remember, we're not a big company and we don't have many assets to do that. But in our local area with schools and colleges, I suppose the colleges further away, but certainly schools, we do work on that. I certainly think one of the trends towards a less formal attire has been overall to our benefit. So knitwear as part of your wardrobe, not just for relaxation, but also for work. I think we've seen that trend. And we've also seen a trend, again, be it small, towards a consumer who wants to own something of quality, keep it for longer, possibly also get it repaired, take care of it, and make sure it has a longer life than, say, a very short sort of fast fashion garment would. That has also played into our hands as well.
And so from Mark is asking about the knowledge around Sea Island cotton, and if the consumer understands it still today as it was in earlier times. And
yeah. Not really. When you say Sea Island, I mean, they understand the end product. You know, the shirt, the t-shirt or the polo shirt that's very fine and wears very well, and is actually, when you wash it, is very tough. You know, it doesn't fall apart. They understand the aspects of that, but when you just say Sea Island cotton, they think of some kind of tropical beach in the middle of the Caribbean. So there is a disconnect there. Some markets, I have to say, Italy and Japan, I would say there is a larger number of consumers that have a view that Sea Island cotton is a high quality cotton. But here, not so much. It's really, what you've got to do to satisfy the consumer is produce a product that they absolutely love. You know, whatever it is about it that they love, it's got to perform well for them in whatever way. And ours just happen to be particularly hard wearing. So people keep them for a tremendously long time. I mean, I get letters from people saying, you know, I know I've still got my mother's or my father's pullover or polo shirt, and it's still as good as it was, you know, 25 years ago when we bought it. And that is the kind of thing that really, at the end of the day, gets you customers that love you.
Yes, absolutely. I won't mention the name of a certain jumper I got for Christmas, wore it a week, and the pilling is unbelievable.
I know what you mean.
So yes, and Alex is asking that, have you ever used any man-made fibres, you know, over the years? Has John Smedley, or has it always been natural fibres?
Again, you're right. Back in the day, if we look into the archive, and it's quite possible Jane, our archivist, is watching this. Yes, there have been synthetic fibres in the collection. I couldn't give you dates, and I don't know how long they were used for. But whatever, and of course we do experiment every now and again. We experiment with new things just like anybody would. And at the moment, we are in the process of experimenting, actually right now, with a yarn which is a combination of cotton and wool together in the same yarn, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. And we're working with a couple of Italian spinners to try to make it work. So yes, we do experiment over the years. And what you do is, when you experiment, you come up with a product. Ultimately, if it works for you, you put it in front of the consumer, and then the consumer will tell you if it's something they like or not. And if they don't like it, then pretty quickly you stop selling it.
Yeah.
So the evolution of the product is really towards, you know, what the consumer wants at the end of the day. But it doesn't stop us experimenting. And certainly, if there were synthetic fibers out there that worked in a way for us, we would experiment with them and see what the consumers thought as well.
That question was actually from Alex Nelson, master of the Cloth Workers Company. So I'll keep going. And I know we've run over, but we're getting in a lot of questions. So
Okay.
Hopefully that is okay with everybody. You know, we'll just run a few more minutes. Yeah, Lynn has said, do you know that the Florence Nightingale Museum at St Thomas's Hospital has closed?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
No. So yeah,
we were briefly in contact with them in the build-up to the celebrations for Florence Nightingale, because of course there are Florence Nightingale hospitals all over the world, and there are Florence Nightingale sort of historic groups in in Japan, in America. She's one of these international figures that is literally known everywhere. So yeah, but I'm very sorry to hear that, if that is the case.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of questions around the influence of Brexit, the influence of COVID, and sustainability. From Lucy, how is John Smedley designing garments to support sustainability? Are there any processes to create more eco-friendly products that you would like to see introduced?
So this is a very interesting question, and I've got two things to say about this. Firstly, when you become a royal warrant holder, part of the process of getting the royal warrant and then retaining the royal warrant is that Prince Charles, as you know very, very well, has been on the kind of sustainability path for a very long time. And his charity, the Prince's Trust, puts you through a very big questionnaire and a lot of analysis of what you're doing to become a more sustainable business. And that's made me think a lot about materials, processes, the energy sources that we use, the CO2 we emit all the way through the process. That's one thing. Secondly, I was looking for more guidance on this, and I found it at the UN. So there is a UN group for fashion, the fashion industry specifically, where they've managed to get together a whole bunch of really very large and small companies in fashion globally to talk about how to reduce CO2 emissions and the impact of fashion globally across the world, from the tier 3, you know, the emissions on the farm, right the way through to retail. And I've learned a lot from that as well. And I know that I can see now internally within our business where some of the emissions are coming from. Those boilers that you saw, you know, we've gone from heavy fuel oil, which was probably the most CO2 polluting energy source, to natural gas, which halves that. But what you've got to get to is either the mighty Bosch engineering company produces hydrogen fueled boilers, and then you get into the whole green hydrogen story, or they go for electric boilers, and the electricity, of course, is generated offshore by offshore wind. So ultimately, you've got to get to renewable energy, and I'm doing as much as I can, and we will be doing more. But sustainability is a huge topic and covers all kinds of interesting things. But the good news is that people like the Royal Warrant Holders and the UN are pushing us and asking the most difficult questions to make us act. That's the most important thing, and we are doing it.
That's good to hear. That's positive. From Janet Prescott, WTIN, which markets are you going to be putting the most effort into after the huge effects of Brexit and COVID? Will the future of fashion itself and the nature of seasonal collections be affected, as many of the major international fairs are predicting?
I would say yes. What markets? Well, I think that the nature of making products, whatever they are, and you know, we still have a very good shoe industry based in Northampton. We have a fantastic cashmere industry in Scotland, an amazing weaving industry in Yorkshire, you know, but we are making all of these products in the most expensive place in the world to make them. Why? Because we pay the wages, we pay the social security costs, we pay the pensions, and we pay the environmental costs that aren't paid in the lowest cost countries in the world. Okay, so in order to continue to do that and to make a product which is undoubtedly expensive as a result, high quality, high cost, high price, really those things are only going to be bought and sold in the wealthiest economies in the world. So we will continue to focus on Japan and Europe and America. However, you cannot ignore the fact that, as I was reading in The Economist the other day, in 50 years' time, and I know that seems like a long time into the future, the second most populous country in the entire world will be, wait for it, Nigeria, right? So markets will change over time, and we will have to adapt to those changing markets. But if we continue to make our products in the UK, which is an expensive place to make products, we will continue to look to sell them in the wealthiest countries in the world, I suspect.
And do you think that there won't be so much around seasonality as well, that you know, the autumn, winter, the spring, summer won't be so important as it has been traditionally?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I would say that undoubtedly generations, as they come up and become consumers at different ages, will have different priorities, possibly to the priorities that we had. I mean, for example, you are already seeing what I call children. Well, they're my children, they're 18 and 13. So young people of that age are working their way through a process of buying and selling second-hand clothing online at a scale that you have never seen before through websites like Depop and others. And this is a trend which will only continue as they find value in that kind of transaction. And that will change the market. I mean, never mind sustainability, seasonality, the balance between new product and product that keeps going through the hands of different people at different prices will change the structure of the market in that way. And I'm not sure about how to answer the seasonality question, but certainly from what I can see, these other aspects of the market are changing quite rapidly as young people grow up.
Yes, so collections will still play a part, there'll still be relevance, but there might be more, like you say, you know, second-hand market for them. In we're still getting questions in, so I'm going to keep going because
we've still got over 100 listeners so far.
So from Charlotte, I'm a textile student in my first year of university. Would John Smedley ever consider giving first-year students a week of work experience?
I didn't know we distinguished between different years at universities. I mean, I think we get a number of applicants each year, and I allow the design team, we have 3 wonderful designers, to do the process of choosing. Of course, the last 2 years have been a complete wipeout, but hopefully next year we'll be able to get back to it. But I would say yes. I mean, I haven't got a prejudice against any particular age or standard or anything. It just has to be a person who fits us. That's the best thing.
Yeah. So by all means, write in to
apply.
To your design department and other departments, of course, not just.
Yes, that's right. We tend to get most people that write to us are design students, but we do have, well, we have had people in our web business and other parts of the business as well.
And from Lee, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that John Smedley have not produced garments with an external logo. If you did go ahead and create garments with a logo, do you think it would increase sales?
So again, it's one of those experiments I talked about earlier that we have tried. I'm sure we've tried it in previous generations with previous managing directors, but we have tried it in my time as well. We didn't use the words John Smedley, but we used a device. Actually, the Jaybird that you saw in the Charitable Trust logo, that's a kind of John Smedley device, which goes back 100 years perhaps. And we used that as a logo for a while and to see if that worked. And it wasn't picked up particularly by consumers in any volume. So we dropped it after a while.
And let's see, we have, So do you believe, I think you may have covered this, but from Chris, do you believe Brexit will help or hinder John Smedley? And also, do you plan to invest more in your online site to sell direct to consumers?
2 slightly different questions with slightly different answers there, but Brexit, I believe, you know, it's one of the interesting things about this job, and you know, I've got directors' minute books of board meetings going back to 1894. Okay, so just hold on to that thought for a second. So I can see the commentary from the directors about the evolution of the business through all kinds of phases. You know, 2 world wars, the shutting down of markets, the opening up of markets, particularly after World War II. Many markets immediately after World War II were very open to trade. But as they saw competition, they started to close down again. So we've been through any number of sort of liberations and contraction and restrictions and border controls and hidden tariffs and overt tariffs and all the rest of it. I suppose what you can say is that since 1948, when the GATT was formed, which subsequently became the World Trade Organization, that tariff percentages on average have come down over the years gradually, and that has been to the benefit of our business and many others. Brexit is a sort of slight reverse of that process, and we're only 1 week into it, remember. But what we see at the moment is that there may be some challenges in terms of process, paperwork, additional costs to paperwork. We're not the fishing industry, so the stuff doesn't go off after 24 hours, but I think we can overcome that kind of thing to get our product out there. And in terms of the web business, that's very interesting, because what you're witnessing at the moment is a proliferation of payment methods around the world. So traditionally, if you go back 30 years, when I took a year off and went around the world, my father gave me an Amex card, right? And an Amex card was tradable pretty much everywhere. Today, you've got 55 different versions of an Amex card in every single country. And some companies, some tech companies have started up and started to allow you to trade through their technology to take advantage of these different payment methods in every different market. And that is an investment that our business is certainly making, and other businesses that want to trade globally will have to make, I think, in the next few years, if they want to meet more consumers in foreign markets.
Thanks for that insight, Ian. I've got a couple more questions. I will try and finish these, because we've still got a lot of people with us. Barry Whitaker, our honorary chairman, I think would like to ask a question, so I will unmute him. Barry, can you hear us?
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, thank you.
Got you.
Ian, a tremendous trip down memory lane. It was most fascinating. PP Townend would have been proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
To listen to it, and I'm sure that some of Smedley's people went to Leeds University, although more on the knitting side, probably not. But anyway, it was a fascinating journey that you outlined to us, and I always welcomed my trips when I was in the textile machinery business to Lee Mills, and have some happy memories of trying to persuade your directors to invest in certain things, which they unfortunately didn't. But I formed a good relationship with one of your directors, John Ogley. And if you're still in contact with John, give him my best wishes, will you?
I certainly am. John is actually one of the trustees of our charitable trust. So yes, I see him.
He and I were good friends over the years. Moving on a little bit there, you've talked about the sustainability and so on. Were I PP Townend, he would have reminded you that cotton, that wool was more environmentally friendly as a fibre than cotton. And I wonder if you're moving more in the direction of wool than cotton fibres.
Interestingly, the very, very large companies who form the core of the group working under the UN's umbrella, looking at the fashion industry and its impact on nature, on farming, on the people in the supply chains, all the way up from, manufacturing to dyeing to all the rest of it. Those people, one of the groups in there is looking at which fibers are the most sustainable fibers. And I'll be honest with you, today, there is no answer. Nobody knows which are the most sustainable fibers. If you look at all of the aspects of a particular fiber, from kind of birth to death, all the way through use, manufacturer, disposal, and all the rest of it, nobody knows what is the most sustainable fiber. I think we will have to wait a little bit longer to find out some sort of comparatives between even synthetics, which are reused again and again and again, and wool, which can be composted to a degree, and cotton, which of course we know takes an awful lot of water and pesticides to grow. They all have their positives and they all have their negatives. And frankly, from what I hear, nobody knows which one comes out top of the Premier League. And I think we'll just have to wait and see what that is. But I'm certainly very open to experimenting with any new fiber that anybody can describe to me in scientific terms as being more sustainable than another fiber.
Ian, having been born in Bradford, I do have a slight bias, I must admit.
Yes.
Yes, I'm not too far down the road either, so I am slightly biased, but I do understand there's a lot of research at the various universities on life cycle analysis. It is so complex in terms of analysing the supply chain that there's so much work to be done there. Okay, well, I think thank you so much, Ian, for answering all those questions. Hopefully, we've managed to answer everyone's.
Well, thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a great honor to speak to so many people in the industry. I've seen the messages popping up, and there are many people that I recognize, and it's fantastic to be able to speak to you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So yes, on behalf of the Bradford Textile Society and the Textile Institute, thank you for such a fascinating talk on the remarkable history of John Smedley and for its continued success today. We have Stephanie Dick, CEO of the Textile Institute, who's joined us, and I'll just unmute Stephanie because I'm sure she'd like to echo the same sentiment. Stephanie, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, I'd obviously just like to thank yourselves, Bradford Textile Society, as well, for organising the webinar this evening in conjunction with our local Yorkshire section. We're extremely grateful to the Society for taking the lead and organising the PP Townend Memorial Lecture. It's such an important event for both organisations in our calendar, and thank you to Ian as well for such a wonderful talk illustrating how important and relevant John Smedley is to the UK industry today. I think the heritage and archive of the organisation is absolutely fascinating, especially the famous sales agents and the information about Florence Nightingale. I certainly would love to visit when everything's COVID safe and secure. So thank you for sharing the information with the delegates this evening. And I think that the number of delegates this evening and who are still online is absolute testament to how the organisation is so respected by all in the industry. And I also reiterate everything that Barry Whitaker, the honorary chairman, mentioned a little earlier. So thank you to you, Caroline, too, and for Sue as well for organising the webinar. Congratulations, and thoroughly enjoyable.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. So for a little token of our thanks, we'll be sending you the Bradford Textile Society paperweight, Ian. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
Here, that comes with your post box.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our attendees who have joined us this evening, and for all your questions as well. It's been great to have the discussion on so many topics. So our next meeting is our online panel discussion next month, Wool for the 21st Century, and that will be held on Tuesday, the 9th of February at 6:30 p.m. again, held in conjunction with the Worshipful Company of Woolmen. For membership details, please see our website and Facebook page. Membership gives free access to all our talks and preferential access to our annual dinner and design seminar. We have a very brief survey, which I'd be grateful if you would complete when you leave this webinar. It will pop up. It should take less than a minute to complete, and it will help inform our future events. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you. I'll just leave on for a minute because we're still getting some comments in. Thank you, everybody. Everyone's just about signed off. Thank you again for your comments. Thank you and goodbye.